Welcome to Digital Currents, brought to you by Morgan Creek Digital. I'm Xavier Segura. Each episode, we spotlight the topics and people changing the tech industry with a focus on AI, blockchain, chips, and big data. Thanks for listening, and please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current. Mark, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Digital Currents. Mark, I know you're a little under the weather. A lesser man would have canceled, but there's just too much good news to saying that.
Too much good news not to talk. I mean, I can't talk because I did a podcast last night and I seemingly talked too much. So I'm a little I'm about 4 days into a cold, right? And it's 7 days or a week, whichever comes first. The joys of grandkids. I mean, I love my grandkids. I love them. But colds, that's how you get them. So, all right, quick reveal. It is Bitcoin Friday. I do have the orange on, and I went kind of back to the halving. This is 2 years ago's halving sock game. Why? One, because Mount Sox did not do halving socks for this time. I don't know why. Come on, guys, kind of get on the game plan. Or if they did, they didn't send them to me. But so that's part of the reason. But the real reason is we're about 6 months past the halving, and the halving is a really, really important thing. And the year following the halving is the best part of the bull market. I mean, here's a crazy thing, X. Since we were together a week ago, we're up 18%. Bitcoin is up 18%.
Wow.
And that's a piker compared to some of the, the other coins. But
Right.
it's still, I mean, my favorite is just how fast the world moves. Peanut, right? For Peanut, the squirrel,
Right.
is number one performing asset. It's already over $1 billion of market cap.
How could it not be, Mark? I mean, it adds so much value.
It does. And don't really get meme coins. I mean, I really don't. But here's the thing. There's like Doge in particular. So yeah. I mean, I understand it's a cult, right? It's a cult of Elon, but it might be more than this. I mean, here's a guy that probably has long-term plans. I mean, he's shown to be a pretty visionary guy.
Yeah.
But he, quietly puts DOGE
Right.
his bio a number of years ago. Everybody's like, what's that? What's that? And I go, Dogecoin. Okay, well, why Doge? Oh, well, ostensibly because of this dog, right? Like, well, dog is DOG, but okay, Doge. But now he just gets appointed as one of the co-heads of the Doge, of government efficiency, which is kind of a part-time assignment until, I think it's kind of cool, until July 4th, 2026, which is the 250th anniversary, which Trump has already said we're going to have a massive kind of World's Fair-esque party. Like, that's actually really cool. I mean, that...
You got to love the Department of Efficiency with two CEOs, right?
And again, Elizabeth Warren tried that, right? She tried to say, oh, you're really off to a good start on efficiency with two heads. And Elon fired back, yeah, but we're doing it for free, unlike you, okay, who gets paid. But anyway, to your point on the government efficiency. So Vivek and Elon have basically said, we're going to take a machete and we're going to find $2 trillion with a T dollars of savings. And it's not going to be that hard. I mean, so I saw a number the other day, X, 462 or 426, I don't remember which one it was, departments that their original charter has run out, and yet they still exist and they're getting funding because nobody has actually just shut them down.
Fix the glitch, right? As they say it in office space. And I mean, I think it's one of those things too, where you see this in kind of, I guess you can call now Biden a lame duck president. You're burning the boats at this point. You're trying to just get things pass because you know there's going to be sort of a change in control. And it's been a pretty sweeping change of control, Mark. I think one of the stats that has been pretty illuminating for me has just been the overwhelming support of crypto, with over 300 lawmakers pro crypto jumping in. And that's going to signal a huge change. And I love this, right? And people are always entitled to change their opinions. That's what a growth mindset is. It's not a good thing to be fixed in your thinking, but just look at our industry, right? We were an industry that was really banking on not being regulated, being allowed to grow. Then people went to jail, and so they said, no, let's be regulated.
Bring the regulator. Tell me the rules. Tell me the rules, and I will follow the rules.
Right. That's a good way to allow people to, basically comply and grow in the way that they need to kind of develop this. But I think on Bitcoin specifically, I mean, we're talking about these all-time highs. I think on our last show is an all-time high. It is another all-time high. We'll probably bring in a prop because we are not above giving people on the YouTube stream something to tune in on. We've got the Bitcoin reveal. We are not matching today. I went with my little vest as it's actually now fall, maybe borderline.
Oh no, it's cold. It's cold. It's in the 40s here, so I'm wearing the hoodie. And yeah, I did go with green, so I didn't get. I wore the blue hoodie the other day, so I figured I couldn't wear blue twice in a week.
But I'm just seeing records, right, Mark? Because you're dealing now with breaking the 3 trillion mark, first time since 2021 on the broader crypto market. And I think this really signals, okay, now it's ahead of silver in terms of, what is the most valuable type of asset. And something, Mark, I wouldn't give you a ton of credit. I always try to remember these little nuggets. We have been beating this institutional 1% drum for a long time. Get 0 is the wrong number. Maybe 10% is the wrong number, but let's just start with 1%. And I think that's been a big shift as we've seen part of this rally be dominated here. But, before we move on too much on that, also to include, this rally is not just institutional, it's also retail, because something like Doge being up 90% or the other meme coins, that's all retail stuff. That's not government money.
So much going on, right? And look, the construct of you and I, or us and anyone else who's listening, to exchange value without an intermediary is extraordinary, right? I mean, in the olden days, that wasn't extraordinary because I would meet you physically and I would hand you something of value and you would take it. It was a bearer instrument, like a piece of paper currency or maybe a note or something, or a physical something. And that's really not exchanging value physically, not really that big a deal. It's been going on for millennia. But to do it digitally and to do it with something that is unique and that can't be copied.
Yeah.
Like if I had a MP3 song, I could copy it, copy paste, and send you a copy. And you don't really care if it's a copy or an original. Because it plays just the same. But the music industry cares. They would much prefer you pay your fee to Spotify or whatever or Pandora like I do. So, but this idea that now anyone, anywhere, anytime can exchange value across the internet, and this is the cool part, right, is Web3 is building on Web2, which is pretty cool. Is building on Web 1, which is cool, which built on junk, right? I mean, and that's a little harsh because computing, which didn't exist 70 plus years ago, it tried, right? And it didn't really do a very good job connecting, and dial-up modems and the old AOL and all the stuff. It was trying, but once the internet kind of came to be, once Tim Berners-Lee wrote that first web page, suddenly we had a platform that tilted the, you said growth mindset, changed the growth rate. Okay, that angle of ascent starts to turn parabolic. And when we can think about all the things we do electronically now, right? We make travel reservations, we buy plane tickets. I tell the story all the time. You know, when I had the aha moment about Web 2 was when I literally bought a plane ticket sitting in a traffic light. Right? That's not a long time. I mean, maybe 90 seconds, but I was able to punch and buy a plane ticket. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, and you say, well, that's silly. Well, not silly to the travel agent, which I displaced, and not silly to the airline, which is now getting more revenue because they have less cost. So all of these things multiply. And so this idea that now we have currencies that allow us to transact across the web is amazing. And yes, Bitcoin for sure is digital gold, is the best store of value, is going to be used by governments, nation states, will displace a portion of the gold bars and bricks in the central banks. There's an article last night about the FOMO that's occurring around the world as other central banks say, well, geez, if the U.S. is going to do it, we better do it.
Yeah. And one spotlight, right, Mark, is Bhutan. I'm sure you saw about this. This is some crazy stats that putting into context, if we said that 0 is the wrong number, you know, a lot of the institutional investors are looking at 1%. So Bhutan is, you know, country out in Asia, not very large, but they have now exceeded 1 billion in their Bitcoin holdings. And they've done this, you know, rather quickly. And that accounts, Mark, for 32% of GDP, according to the IMF. Wow. So they are going, they're probably the new Bitcoin country ahead of El Salvador.
That's amazing. That's double El Salvador. El Salvador is 500 million.
That's right.
And everybody thought they were idiots when they did it. And look, the volatility is real. And so you gotta deal with that. I mean, literally, I saw a video, and I'll pick on him because he deserves to be picked on, but you know, downtown Josh Brown, love you, Josh, if you actually hear this, but I'm gonna pick on you. So I was on the show, the noontime show with Scott Wapner, you know, the judge, and Josh has been a mainstay on that. And I went on that in 2018 with Mr. Wonderful. I was talking about Bitcoin, and they're like, you are an idiot. There is no use case. This is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now I will give Mr. Wonderful credit. Last year, I got to moderate a panel with him, and I said, I'm going to throw up this video and show that now you've changed your mind. You just raised a $200 million fund to invest in Web3. He's like, yeah, that's fair. And I'm like, okay, that's good. But Josh, I saw a clip this morning from a show he did yesterday where he's still pounding the table that there's no use case. This is simply, you know, speculation and gambling. Like, guys, come on. Come on. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, fine. You know, you don't understand it. You haven't done the work. Fine. Today,
yeah,
nope. You can't. I mean, someone actually said it could still go to zero.
So can Microsoft, right? So can any public market. And I think that's a wonderful transition. A company that we like to talk about that kind of bridges the true amazing stats on MicroStrategy. Okay, so they basically now have surpassed 20 billion and their ROI is over 100% because through the power of leverage, they're basically able to buy Bitcoin around a cost of 39,000, right? So this now leads them to, you know, have this big war chest of over 250,000 Bitcoin over, you know, 20 billion. So this is kind of, okay, I can get the idea that maybe to pick a price at any point in time is gambling, right? It could go up, it could go down. That's what a market is. But to kind of, you know, suggest that all of a sudden it could just drop over to zero is to, as my former high school history teacher would say, it is to fail to grasp the complexity of the question.
Love that. Yes. And again, questions are always more important than answers. And the question at this point that you have to ask is, why did this technology get invented? Why did it survive? The miracle is that it hit $1.
Right.
You know, because it started at 0.003 cents. And literally, right? You could mine it on your laptop with a little plug-in USB thing, and you could get 50 in 10 minutes and like for nothing, like literally for nothing, for a small amount of electricity. And so the fact that it survived that, and from the guy who, bought 2 pizzas for 10,000, and which we owe a debt of gratitude because he proved that it could work.
Right.
But all of that survival of the original point, is kind of like the Orville and Wilbur here in North Carolina, right? People for years thought, oh, we can fly. We'll just make these machines that look like birds. And they tried to do the things that flap, but that didn't work. So nobody had really figured out, which I still don't understand 100%, right? That if the air hits the airfoil and it goes faster across the top than the bottom, it rises. That's actually pretty amazing stuff. And to think that these multi-1,000-pound machines can go up in the air. But they invented it, right? They made it work. But there was no guarantee that it would become commercial, that people would actually every day get on airplanes and fly around.
Right.
Because we had trains. Trains were perfectly good. And the train companies really didn't like the thought of being displaced. So they spread some FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And my favorite was when they told people that, well, geez, if you get on a plane, you'll die. Like, what do you mean I'll die? Well, once you go past a certain velocity, your body caves in on itself. Which, again, for someone who doesn't understand biology or physics might say, geez, that sounds bad. I better not do that. And I think that's kind of what the FUD around Bitcoin has been. It's like, if I'm a bank, I kind of like the fact that if I want to send you money X, I have to have a bank account, you have to have a bank account, and they charge me a wire fee. That's good for the bank. But if I tap a couple buttons and send you a Bitcoin, they don't get a cut. And I understand, I do, that they don't like that. This is one of the things about, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. We're going to wipe out entire departments, right? We're going to cut the Department of Education. We're going to cut the Department of this. Those costs are someone else's income. So I am a little bit, sorry for, probably some really good people, maybe not everybody, but a decent number of really good people that have these jobs and they really believe in what they're doing. They're gone, right? And it's like when I hear, two companies merge and like, oh, we have these synergies. You mean firing people? That they don't think that's synergistic. They don't like that. So I do think that the $7 trillion, it's a big number, every year that's spent so that intermediaries can control the transfer of value, taking those expenses out of the system with this better technology sounds great, except there's a whole bunch of people that make their living on those revenues. So I get, but the cool thing about the world, about you said complexity, the great thing about complex adaptive systems, and if you never actually read the book Complexity, you should. It's actually a really cool book about this construct. And complex adaptive systems, back to my biology roots, are really amazing. That if you change something here, that system will adapt. And if you take those revenues out of financial services, it's not the world's going to stop. It's going to move and embrace, kind of like an amoeba. It's going to embrace this new system, and it's going to facilitate amazing, amazing things. I mean, you think about an artist putting content now directly into the hands of their fans. Okay, no middle person, no record label, no, broker in the middle. The fan gets what they want. The artist gets what they want. Now, that record label, they're kind of pissed off about that because they liked taking 60+% of those revenues. And there was a time when that was really important because that was the only way because they controlled the relationships with the DJs who would play the songs on the radio back when you actually put a platter on a turntable. And anyway.
So I think this is an interesting thing too, Mark. One of the pieces that we spoke about on last week. Thanks everybody for tuning in that one. That was a popular one. People really seem to like it. This idea that some of the innovation we've spoken about over the past couple of years has been leaving the U.S. and there's sort of been policies that haven't really been addressing that gap. And there's talk now that there could be a shift in trying to bring back or fostering kind of this U.S. environment around innovation and specifically around crypto. And it's around an area you may not kind of associate with innovation. It's a tax potential exemption. So basically, there's an idea being floated around to eliminate capital gains on cryptocurrencies issued by the U.S. So initially, it's going to apply towards, folks that are established here. So there'll be immediate beneficiaries, Cardano, Algorand, and Ripple. And by the way, Ripple and Cardano were some of the biggest winners this past week. So not a coincidence, but there could be a carve out, Mark, right, on companies coming back to the U.S. So it's going to be coupled with some other stats that we've been seeing where institutional investors, I think this was our friends over at Signum, the crypto bank out in Asia, they released a report and it basically shows that the institutional investor is wildly optimistic and is planning 57% of institutional investors in their survey plan to boost crypto allocations amongst the bull run. 65% of respondents are bullish long-term and 69% see regulatory clarity in the horizon. So now you're starting to see not just clarity, but potential incentives to come back onshore the U.S. and kind of wiping out tax, in my opinion, Mark, is a pretty big deal. We'll see if it actually
huge. Look, your point on refocusing on innovation is so amazing. And because what people don't understand and appreciate, the largest venture capital investor in the world is the U.S. government. And people are like, no, that's not true. It's a bureaucracy. Well, yes, it is. And a whole bunch of that investment is pork projects. So that's not necessarily good, but it is getting into the hands in many cases of people who are innovating, and they make venture capital investments. Now they do dumb stuff like Solyndra, but they do some really smart stuff. Like this stuff, like the internet, DARPANET, or like little Niobium, right? That it was funded by the Department of Defense, who said, we're never going to put our data in the cloud because if you have to decrypt it in order to use it, not happening. And look, this sad tale of woe. My son lives out in San Francisco. He, like many of us, were part of this big hack that just happened where they got social security numbers, driver's license, home address. And so he had a tandem, two guys calling him on the phone, one pretending to be from Google, the other pretending to be from Coinbase, basically trying to tell him that, there was this breach and they were there to fix it. And thankfully, he did kind of get snookered by the Google guy, who, because he had his social security number, he had his driver's, he's like, okay, fine. So they hacked his Gmail and then they tried to go after his Coinbase. And thankfully he locked his Coinbase account because the other guy who called up right after said, well, that other guy's legit. It's like, why are you telling me you don't know Google? No. You guys are working together. So he had, but crazy. And why did that happen? It's because the data at Target or wherever it was, I don't remember which company it was, it got decrypted. So the government is never, ever going to use the cloud unless someone invents a technology that makes sure that the data stays encrypted all the time. So there are a handful of companies, and we've invested in a couple of them, they're working on that. But the one was funded by the DoD, and they will own a piece of the IP, not shockingly, so they can use it on their systems. And so this idea that we're not good business people I mean, people want to piss on the U.S. government. Great. Bureaucracy, bad. Pork, bad. But at the end of the day, touch wood, pretty good place to live. Things function pretty well. Air traffic control works pretty well. Highways are amazing. Defense is good. So there's a lot of good. And we've had a lot of innovation. And no, we haven't done some stuff perfectly. Like, we should be like Singapore, and we should take the Social Security money and invest it. Now, it was funny. Peter Schiff the other day, which I actually was shocked. I mean, he typed a lot of stuff, basically laying out this whole case for how Bitcoin was going to solve the Social Security problem. Now, people were like, oh my God, Peter, that's a good idea. And he's like, dude, that's sarcasm. So what he was saying was, yeah, this only works if no one ever sells. It's just a Ponzi scheme, because he's been saying it's a Ponzi scheme since day one. Mm-hmm. And like, no, Peter, you're onto something, right? If you took a portion, not the whole thing, but you took a portion of Social Security and you put it into Bitcoin and some into stocks and some into bonds and stuff, and didn't just do a pay-as-you-go system. That's what Singapore does. Singapore has two entities, GIC and Temasek, that use that government pool, and they invest in the best companies in the world. And if you do that even a couple times, right, you don't need a lot of wins to basically fund everything. And, I did love the clip they had the Donald was talking about, maybe we'll pay off our debt, with a Bitcoin. And I think he kind of gets Bitcoin. Now he's the Bitcoin president, but his kids get it and his advisors get it, David Bailey and others. I'm not sure he really, really gets it. He gets that it gets votes, right? If I say I love Bitcoin, I'm going to get a lot of votes. Okay, good. I'm not sure he really, really gets it. But he did say, well, maybe we'll just pay people back in Bitcoin, which if you're a debtor, right, and you owe a bunch of money, mm-hmm, and you can't pay it back, right? If we confiscated all the wealth of all the people in America, we couldn't pay back the national debt. So that's not an option. Not even income, but wealth. So that's not an option. Well, historically, you could say, well, you could restructure it, but no one would take the deal 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. They're like, no, I want $1. If you said, I'll give you 60 cents on the dollar in Bitcoin.
Right. And this, Mark, there's proof of somebody who actually did this. And I know that we're big football fans. You got to credit Odell Beckham Jr. Right? Oh, let's get him, right? People, the story in 2021, he had a big career. He's kind of on the tail end of the career, but still had something left. And he said, you know what? I'm going to take a small contract to, get back in the game. So he took $750K salary, but he took it in Bitcoin, and people thought that he was really like out of his mind. He's been swindled. He's going to end up broke like many of the, kind of professional athletes. But now he's laughing at all of the bank because he's basically doubled up since then, right? So actually not doubled up, not quite. He's probably about $1 million in. But it's a good example of you perfectly working.
Great example. Well, and Russell Okung did the same thing even earlier.
Right.
And he had a $6 million contract, put half in Bitcoin. And I think I have this right. That's now worth $45 million.
Wow.
I mean, because he was early, and literally people thought you're an idiot. And I sat next to Russell at a event out in California. I mean, the guy is a mountain. I mean, he is a gigantic human being, nicest guy, and super bright. And it was really. I was impressed with a couple of things. So I went to this thing, and it's put on by a venture capital fund out in California, and they do it every year. And I went out there, and a couple of things. So I'm sitting next to Russell and have this great conversation about crypto, and thought that was cool. And then I see Kaepernick, and next to him I see Chameleonaire, the rapper. Mm. And I'm like, okay, they're just here for eye candy, right? Well, Chameleonaire gets up to speak. And like, he's just going to talk about rap music or whatever.
Right.
Oh, no. The dude was, one, an amazing speaker. Two, an unbelievable investor. He was the first money in to autonomous driving company that eventually got bought by Ford. I mean, the guy was amazing. And I like, again, preconceived notion. He's a rapper or an athlete. They can't possibly be good business. Well, no, they're really, really good. And I was impressed. And then, they had a couple others. They had a couple movie stars and stuff. And the one that was actually really good was Reese Witherspoon. So she created, Reese's Closet, an online thing where you can go in her closet and you can buy the stuff that she likes. Like, pretty smart, right? People know your name. They come, they say, if you like it, I'm going to like it. So, I mean, it's not like the craziest big idea, but it's kind of cool.
Yep. And I think there's one thing, and we love the redemption stories, and for those listeners, we have certain companies that, and sometimes certain countries, but mostly companies that we will kind of, joke around with. And when they do good things, we will sing their praises. And when they do seemingly not so great things, we will also, call that out. So IBM is back in the news, although it's through Red Hat, Mark. So Red Hat has acquired Neural Magic to boost AI capabilities in the hybrid cloud. Basically continuing their work on VLLMs. And I think this is a pretty interesting move because you're talking about, again, what I've been pounding the drum on is basically if you say something, Mark, enough times, enough people listen, they'll will it into existence. I really think we're going to have a growth in M&A. And as we see, this company started in 2018. That's when Morgan Creek had its first venture firm in digital. And now we're kind of early on to kind of like the machine learning AI stuff, at least before it got really huge in 22. And so kind of now what I'm seeing with IBM and what we always continually say, IBM, if you want to call IBM a Web 1 company, that would probably be generous. They're probably like base, a
computer and networking company.
Exactly, right? So they're way even before Web 1. And so for them to kind of continue staying relevant, it has to be through acquisition, right? So, and here it is, an acquisition of a subsidiary part of the business, which is still incredibly innovative and kind of allowed to kind of given a little bit more room to operate. And I think that this is kind of showing a shift where you're going to continue seeing companies trying to not fall too far behind on the AI arms race. And if you're looking at this acquisition, it is a little bit unusual, in my opinion, because it's a company from 2018. They raised about $50 million and they did it from some of the big boys like Andreessen. Some of the acquisitions have been a little bit more recent. So companies that kind of started maybe 3 years ago. So this one has been around more like, almost 8 years at this point, for 7 years. And I think it's going to be a sign that enterprise tech companies, in order to compete, they have to go into M&A. And they're going to have to go quickly before companies start to rise up in value. Mark, do you think IBM has got a chance to continue being the rebound story? When I think of IBM, I think about gray carpets. I think about mid-level cubicles. I think of fluorescent lighting, and that is not the company they're trying to be today.
No, look, I mean, IBM was literally dead money for 30 years, like from the 60s through the 90s. And it had some fluctuation, but it was pretty much dead money over that whole period. And then it had this big rise in the 90s around the internet. And then they, came back later and they acquired Red Hat, which was a pretty big deal. And now, but then they were kind of getting dead money from 2000 to 2020. And, up until a year ago, a year ago, they had gone into one of these flat lines again. Bad leadership, bad, not taking advantage of this opportunity. But yet you always heard about them. Like when people said, oh, blockchain, they're like, oh, let's hire IBM and they'll help us with, their hash graph or whatever it was. And even one of our portfolio companies, Figure, when they first set up their blockchain, they talked to IBM and used their system. Now they changed to a different one, but ultimately, I think this is a great example where complex adaptive system, this company has existed for a long time. It's survived a lot of change. And with good leadership, I think it can reinvent itself. And And look, it's up a lot. It's up 36+% in the past year as people recognize that they're doing some things right. Now, there are others, like some of the big hedge funds were short this thing, like Druck and others. But I agree with you. I think they have a shot. Look, there's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen. Like, again, announcement this morning that the Doge is going to work with Cardano, Hedera.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it was IBM. I think it was IBM. I thought.
All the U.S. guys that could be tax exempt. It's not a surprise.
And they want to create evote.gov, right? So because we've talked about this all the time. Why is it that we don't know the moment the polls close who won the election, right? Everyone has one of these. So you can have a unique identity, one person, one vote, no early and often, no, and blockchain solves the vote.
Right. I mean, Mark, if we could find out the winner of the original Simon Cowell show, man, I'm blanking on American Idol. If we could find out the winner of American Idol that night with a rotary telephone, and that was 5 years ago.
No, that's a great example. It's a great example, and no fraud. So what's cool about this is that this is going to happen. Now, the one thing, and this was the point I was making about Doge earlier. So Dogecoin, I've never got. I don't own it, sadly, because it's gone from zero to 61 billion. It's larger than 331 of the S&P 500 companies. It's an amazing stat. So $60+ billion. But here's the thing. It has no use case. Literally none, zero. It has no developers. It's a fork of a fork, right? It's a fork of Litecoin, which is a fork of Bitcoin. So it's kind of dead code unless and I'm not saying he's this 6D chess, but maybe if Elon always thought, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get involved in government. And if they say, well, we're going to do this voting system, and since we're here, we're going to start coding on Doge, and we're going to make it the central bank digital currency. Ooh, that would be interesting. I mean, I still don't like central bank digital currency. I want us to trade value outside the government systems.
So if Trump then, Mark, was stated to be the first Bitcoin president, then you can maybe argue that Senator Cynthia Lummis is the first Bitcoin queen. So the Bitcoin Act, we got to talk about that, right? It was proposed that the U.S. over 5 years acquire 1 million Bitcoin, right?
And let's 1 million. Okay, now remember, there's only 21 million.
That's right.
There aren't 21 million because there's been about 3 million lost, stolen, locked up, the Satoshi wallet. So we're talking 18 million, of which 16 of those 18 have been mined, and there's 2 million left to mine. So 1 of 18 is a big number.
Right.
Absolutely. And that will go in and never come out because that will be locked up in a vault like the gold bars. And that's why gold has worked so well as the base layer of money, right? Because it doesn't have any liability associated with it, and people accumulate it. Then they create their currencies on top of it, which that's what fiat is. And that's why fiat is such a challenge because you can create it out of thin air. But this is a big deal. And Senator Lummis is, and look, I think she's legitimately a proponent. She was orange pilled by Caitlyn and others who are her great cowgirls from Wyoming, meaning they went to the university. But this is a big deal. And she's already drafted the bill. And she thinks they can get it passed in the first 100 days. And this is a game theory. If the U.S. does that, every other Western country has to do it. Every Eastern country has to do it. Everybody has to do it. And it's like the Satoshi Nakamoto quote. You might want to get some,
right,
in case it catches on. Because if everyone thinks the same way, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm. But there's just the kind of the interesting thing. And I think this is a good point to get to, because if you describe this so many times, Mark, where the first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then eventually you kind of bring them over to your side when you're able to kind of just stay around and kind of what you is basically where you are in the S curve. So now they're trying to kind of understand this, right? Because it's kind of target date is between 25 and 29, which obviously coincides with the new administration. So some of the questions on feasibility and kind of getting 200K Bitcoin, it comes from this idea that the Fed generates income from securities and service fees and reporting kind of these excess earnings to the Treasury, which are actually like corporate tax payments in GDP calculations. So basically, we are reporting total capital of 43 billion, and this is setting up our chart of the week, because this is when our team kind of uncovered the chart of the week. We find a lot of very surprising facts, like what we're about to share, is that despite reporting total capital of 43 billion in Q2, the Fed's accounting practices actually were a little bit off, because the total paid in capital was actually a negative 140 billion. But for the just a little bit off. I will share this chart, Mark, and I am very curious to hear kind of some of the commentary that you have, because if you are trying to adopt a new standard and trying to actually come up with a structure where you can actually buy Bitcoin and try to get to this federal target rate of 4.75%, you're going to actually need the capital, right? So it could create an even greater deficit if it's not done with the right
if it's not done quickly and efficiently. Yeah, because you'll be chasing the higher prices. Everyone front runs you. Like announcing that you're going to do it before you do it. The unrealized gains and losses.
Yeah, this is a pretty ugly chart for those that are looking and on not on the YouTube feed. Another reason why you should join and kind of see what's going on here. We'll just have to imagine it for those that are on audio only. I will dictate, Mark, you will receive here. What we're looking at is a chart of unrealized gains and losses on investment securities, by our government. And so on the left side, you have billions, and then you have on the right side a time axis. And what it's basically kind of shown is over time, there's a certain goal and expectation of making money, right? That's why you kind of hold an investment. And then actually what happens when they're held over to maturity. And I think that what I'm sure you're grabbing on this chart, Mark, is what's happened post-COVID has kind of painted a very different picture. So with that kind of setup, Mark, definitely let folks know, what are some of the reactions when you see something like this?
Yeah, look, the Fed was is the buyer of last resort, right? That's why it's created. It is the buyer of last resort for bonds. And the problem is when we went to a ZERP world,
right?
You basically had every crappy company, every crappy jurisdiction, every underfunded, overexpensed municipality building a new fire station and a new police station and a new government building. And they did because they could issue debt for free. Well, people are like, well, why would I buy, I'll just pick on Maricopa County bonds when they can't pay them back? So the government's like, all right, fine, we have to buy them. And when they're at zero, okay, fine. But then the problem is they raised interest rates and created this massive, and we're talking massive, we're talking, almost $750 billion of unrealized loss. Now it is unrealized. And the one thing the Fed doesn't have to do is it doesn't have to sell back into the market and realize those losses, because that would be a disaster. So it can hold. The problem is most of these bonds were issued by people that may or may not be able to pay back. And this goes to, in the olden days, right, my parents' generation, your banker lived in your neighborhood, knew the names of your kids, knew you, knew your wife or your spouse, knew everything, knew your dreams, your aspirations, and they lent you money with the expectation of getting both principal and interest payback. That was called hedged finance, right? You lend against an asset that you expect to get paid back. Well, then as I came along in my generation, we went into the world of, well, the banker no longer lives in your neighborhood. They're kind of at corporate, but we got a branch. And so the teller knows your name, but okay. And we don't really keep all the loans on the balance sheet. We kind of securitize them and slice them and dice them and sell them off. And now we went into something called speculative finance, which is where, yeah, I'll lend you money for that beach house you want. And I know you could never pay me back the principal, but you can make the interest payments, right? So we're good. Mm-hmm. So you had this, speculative finance period, and, banks went up and everybody was happy, and, prices of stuff went up and the boomers were really psyched. And debt just kept going up and up and up. Because, hey, if I can borrow for basically free and I don't have to pay it back and I can just service it with interest, okay, good. Well, then maybe 20 years ago, we got into the super slice and dice, the CMOs and the CLOs and all the alphabet soup. And everyone's seen the movie The Big Short. And basically the banks are no longer anywhere. They're not even in your state, right? They're in some other state, and they don't know your name. They don't know you. They don't even know if you're alive, if you can fog a mirror. They just need volume of securities. And so they were doing, liar loans, literally liar. It's like, oh, my income is $80,000. I don't need to see any proof of that. Just take this money. And the problem is now you went into Ponzi finance. And Ponzi finance is where it's a bullet loan for 5 years. No interest payments, no principal payments, no payments at all. Just you sell that property in 5 years and pay it off or refinance, and it'll be good. Well, we know how that worked out. It didn't work out well. And so I think we're headed back, maybe, to a world where we actually only lend money against things where we think we have an asset. Like we have this little investment Arch lending, and they lend against Bitcoin, but they only lend 50% of the value, and then they take control so that if the price goes down and you don't post more collateral, they can seize it, and so they don't have loan losses. So you lend against real assets, and you don't lend more than the value of the asset, and you don't get into this Ponzi finance game. So what this is telling me is Ponzi finance, no way these counties can pay this debt back. So the Fed is going to eat some losses. Now, they're not going to eat all of those losses because they'll hold some to maturity in some of those counties, because this is my prediction. The Fed will continue to cut rates to make it possible that these guys can extend and pretend.
Right.
They can extend the loans longer.
And I mean, it's well said and incredible analysis, Mark, because I think when you look at this, that what I see in this chart is the banking crash. They did not have the benefit of the largest military in the world. And when they experienced people calling them, they went out of business. Ironically, they got absorbed back into ultimately the Fed, JP Morgan. No, just kidding. But it's funny that we mentioned The Big Short, Mark, because I've
One and the same.
Yeah, they're one and the same, which is why Jamie Dimon had to turn down the job. Why? Because he already has it. So why does he already
More powerful than Treasury Secretary.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I joke with you a bunch of times in this, Mark, that my gym TV is a place in the house where I just get sucked into this hole of recommendations of movies. They're mostly B-list, but I think we've kind of expired all the B-list because it actually showed me The Big Short the other day, which of course I watched, seen it for the billionth time. Speaking of Big Short. So I think, when we see some of these are really good ideas about, how we can potentially create some new innovation and hopefully, raise the living standard in the U.S. along the way by, getting to a point where we can even start thinking about a surplus again, like we used to have, maybe.
In a world where the Fed invests in an asset that will appreciate,
Right.
as opposed to an asset that devalues because the person that issued it can't pay you back. I mean, it's a novel concept, right? that we used to do. This is the crazy thing. There was a time in America where that's how the world worked, right? You invested in things that built things. You didn't invest in things that were going to go away. And the financial engineers came along and said, well, that's very pedestrian of you, but we can make things go faster. Sure. And so if we can get to a place where we get back to basics, right? Yeah. Let's lend money to people who can pay us back. Let's invest in venture capital projects that reward innovation and wealth creation. Let's not tax innovation and wealth creation. I mean, and it's been talked about a lot, and I don't know if I'll actually do it, but there's an amazingly good case that we should never tax income, right? Because taxing income is a discouragement to creating income. So what do people do? They hide it, they lie, they cheat, they take cash. My barber does not take credit because and I'm not accusing him of anything. My guess is if you add the dollars, but that's, people pay their housekeeping help under the table. So what do? You cheat. And so if you had a system where as much income or wealth as I can create, capital gains in particular, right? You should never tax capital gains. Right? You should encourage all the investment because investment creates growth. Don't tax the gains. What do you tax then? Because you have to have revenue. Yes, we have to have revenue. We have to have roads. We have to have, airplanes and air traffic control. Yes, tax consumption. And the great thing about taxing consumption is it can be super progressive. Yeah. Meaning, if you want to buy a big $500 million yacht, you're going to pay a bunch of tax and no one's going to care. They're still going to buy the yacht. And yes, you can exempt all the daily needs so that people who are below the poverty line don't get taxed. And that's a better form than a handout. Welfare handouts have a stigma, right? And if you don't have to think of it as a handout, it's just, hey, I am struggling to make ends meet and I don't pay the same tax as a billionaire that wants to buy a Ferrari. That seems fair to me. And the billionaire doesn't have to pay the tax if they don't buy the Ferrari. That's right.
And we've been seeing that model too, Mark, work in smaller countries like that we've been to in Singapore, where they've done the same thing. There's no income tax, but then there's a huge tax on consumption. For example, the Ferrari example or the car example, you need a 100K 10-year license to purchase a car, any car, right? So it could be a Toyota Corolla, 100K off the bat. And then to actually purchase the car, they are usually marked up 2 times. So that Corolla will cost as much as a Mercedes plus 100K, which goes straight to the government. So anyway, I think we're just at time, Mark, and I think this was a great continuation. We'll have more to say about what is happening in the economy and how it's affected by some of these new policies, which are showing us that Web3 has really begun to become much more mainstream, where I think we're in a different part of this S-curve. And we will remind our listeners, as always, rate, review, and subscribe. Join us on YouTube, where you can see Chart of Week. You can see Mark's SOP reveal and see if we're matching today. We are not, but we will try again better.
Although I do have the blue shirt on, so we're not really matching. But
we had a little bit of great matching last week. We both did It
was unbelievable. Last week was as if we planned it. So, all right. Well, enjoy the weekend, and
we'll remind our listeners, as always, to stay current. Thank you for joining us this week on Digital Currents. Check out our links to our website and social media in the show's description box. Please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
This podcast should not be construed as investment advice nor solicitation for the sale of any security, advisory, or other service. Investment themes and ideas discussed may be owned by funds managed by the host and podcast guests. Any conflicts at the time of production have been mentioned by the host but are subject to change. Listeners should consult their personal financial advisors before making any investment decisions.